Hi, class. Welcome to week 2 of Applied Linguistics. I wanted to open this week in prayer and then we'll head into a little review of what you're going to be learning this week. Father, I thank you for each one of these students. I pray that this week you would give them clarity of thought and of mind as they read their chapters and review articles and complete their assignments. I pray that you would give them Godspeed in getting their studies done so they still have plenty of time to enjoy your wonderful world. Lord, I just pray your blessings upon each one of them and give them a peace as they endeavor to get their assignments done. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, when we look at our assignments for this week, we have a list of readings, and you are going to be tackling chapters 8 and 1. Chapter 8 is what I'm going to be focusing mostly in our little chat today. There are a couple of articles. One of the articles that's listed in MyFire for Bix and Calp is actually not accessible. And I found another article and I was going to email it to you. But then when I looked at how much you had to do this week, I thought, you know what, you've already got enough. I'm not going to bother sending you the other article. I'm going to just chat about Bix and Calp a little bit with you today in the way of a review because I have a feeling most of you have had it in other classes. So you do have quite a few things to pull up just to look at today. The majority of your time is going to be spent in reading your chapters, particularly chapter 8. Chapter 1 has a little bit of evolution in it again this week, so just a forewarning with that. As far as your assignments go, you do have chapter summaries that are due to turn in. You do have a rubric to follow. You're going to double space your chapter summaries, and they're only a page long, so that's not going to be too terribly long. But for each one, remember, I want you to reflect how that chapter is going to help you prepare for the classroom. So be aware that you have 3 chapter summaries due this week, and you also have an activity with Cummins Quadrant, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in the PowerPoint. So those assignments are found on MyFire. In chapter 8, we're talking about language acquisition, and when we think of language acquisition in an ESOL class, we think about second language acquisition, but second language acquisition is very similar to first language acquisition. And so our chapter covers that and does a little bit of a comparison. And so we're going to talk about that. Babies are definitely born with the ability to learn language. Children who immigrated to a country before the age of 7 speak the language of their new country with a native fluency. And you're going to read about the interactionist hypothesis, also known as constructivism, that says that children learn the rules of language from their environment and that they formulate rules about patterns that they've noticed that they've heard others in their community using, and then they apply those to new utterances. And so when we are working with children from ages 5 to 10, they are acquiring the languages that surround them, whether that be one language or 2 languages. And we're going to talk about the stages of language acquisition. I believe one of your handouts on MyFire has a list of the different stages of language acquisition, but just in the way of review, we're going to talk about the pre-production, early production, speech emergence, and also intermediate fluency. And I'm not going to spend too long on that slide. I'm just going to jump right on. I found a link on YouTube, and I looked for another one that was a little bit more interesting. But this one actually covers the stages of language acquisition. So if you're having any trepidation about the stages, this is a little video that you can go to. Just go to YouTube and do a search for typical stages of speech and language development or language acquisition, and it'll probably take you to this same one. I'm not going to use our time together to watch it because I think for most of you, a quick little review will suffice. When we talk about second language acquisition, the handout that you see on MyFire talks about pre-production characteristics, and we're going to talk a little bit about how children acquire language, and actually you're going to read quite a bit about it. Under the phonology section in your textbook, you'll read that they begin language by hearing the melody of their own native language, even when they're in the womb in the 3rd trimester. a baby is already acquiring the features of language, and they're listening to the pitch of their mother's voice and their father's voice. And that's awfully cool to think about when you're around a mama who's in her third trimester. Speech can pass through the wall of the abdominal area with little disruption. And so when we're talking about our learning actually begins in the womb. And then when our babies are born, they start using the vowel sounds, making all their cute little ooh ah sounds. And when we advance to babbling around 4 to 6 months, our babies are saying ba 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 and ma 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 ma. And after 6 months, they begin to learn the phonetic or phonemic structure of their language. And of course, that ability to distinguish sounds comes before babies actually have the ability to produce those sounds, but they can still hear and distinguish the sounds. And then babies begin to speak, and they often have common pronunciations. That's covered in your text on 241. I love that page. It has little examples like babies saying titu for thank you. Interestingly, our text says that sometimes when we don't hear syllables in children's speech, they are still pronouncing those syllables. When speech has been analyzed using a spectrometer, the researchers have found that syllables are being pronounced, but they're just too soft to be heard by the human ear. The early production stage has certain characteristics, and your students that are learning English maybe in middle school, they're not going to have the success at reaching native fluency, but they might still be in the early production stage. And if they're learning a language after puberty, then they're going to have a lot of pronunciation practice, a lot of grammar exercises, a lot of vocabulary memorization. And language is many things put together. But remember, when you're teaching a second language or you're working with a second language learner, that second language is stored in a different part of the brain than the first language. And when you have a bilingual learner, they're going to be better at solving certain problems. They're going to have a certain mental flexibility that our monolingual students do not have. They're going to have a greater awareness of how language works in the end as an end result. But it can be pretty tough. Your textbook pointed out that Armenians often know 4, 5, or 6 languages. And our Swiss students are usually trilingual. They just put a lot of emphasis on learning different languages, and they recognize the effect that that has on the brain. When our native speakers are first beginning to speak as children, we'll all relate to the fact that when babies say a word, they're often speaking a sentence. When this little guy says ball, he's saying, I want the ball, or throw me the ball, or I see a ball. Ball carries a whole sentence full of meaning. And so we need to encourage our second language learners and think about, when they say a word, they're saying a whole sentence as well. In the semantics section of your text, we learn that babies learn the meaning of words by looking at the object. And you'll often see caregivers going through books with children and pointing at objects. And again, one word can speak volumes. Children often say their first word around 12 months, and they learn about 10 words a day until the age of 6. And when we talk about students having a productive vocabulary, the words that they can use, we're talking about usually about 14,000 words. But their receptive vocabulary, the words that they can understand when they hear them, can be twice that size. If you walk up to a child, whether it's a niece or a nephew that's learning language, or whether it's a second language learner, and you say, look at that blank. And maybe you're using a word that that child or that second language learner is unfamiliar with. Well, the child or the student knows to look at an object. Look at that blank. They might not know what the word is that you're filling in there, but they know to look at an object. And when a child is learning semantics, he's learning the range of meanings that we, the adults in his life, have assigned to a word. When you're teaching a child what a dog is, there's a large range of meaning. We could be talking about a Chihuahua or a Saint Bernard. Um, when we teach babies to sign and use sign language, we are lowering their frustration level. I highly recommend the use of sign language with toddlers. Instead of whining, they can learn to do something to convey meaning, and it makes learning to talk easier. After 18 months, a child usually begins to express a complete thought. And if you're working with a second language learner and they're older, they still go through this stage of a two-word stage. And in your book, you'll see the little chart where it's an agent and then an action, like doggy run, or an action and then an object. So pay particular attention as you go through that section. Your book refers to telegraphic speech, words that are going to be added to the two-word utterances. We're going to start adding articles and pronouns and helping verbs soon. And so that's the next stage that's coming. Morphology, when we're talking about morphology, students and young children that are learning language imitate what they hear. And so we have the word dog, we make it plural by saying dogs. And so our learners are going to imitate that, but they're going to tend to overgeneralize, and they're just going to add an S to everything to make it plural. A mouse, well, then there must be three mouses. They learn if you're adding ed to make something past tense. You often hear a young child say, I go to grandma's if I've already done that. I goed to grandma's, just adding ed because they're imitating what they've heard. They're overgeneralizing. I singed a song last night at church. I singed to you on your birthday, and they're overgeneralizing. Well, our second language learners are going to do that. They're going to have um, overgeneralization issues. They're going to take a rule that they've seen other people use and they're going to apply it to everything in their language. Now, generally, our native speakers are going to outgrow that by age 4 or 5, but that's something we're going to have to help our second language learners through. Again, I'm not going to take time to click here, but this is just a cutie pie video of the dog singing along with the child playing the harmonica. I just thought it was too cute. Speech emergence, when we are talking about emergent speech, we're talking about those that have been around English and exposed to English and learning English for about 1 to 3 years. And that might be the students in your classroom. So when you're learning about speech emergent categories, think about students that are in your classroom that have about 1 to 3 years of English under their belt. Another thing in your textbook that I think applies to us as teachers, the 6 to 9-year-olds like jokes based on some kind of phonological similarity. For example, they might say, "What's black and white and red all over?" And they're playing off of the word red. It could mean a newspaper. It could mean a red embarrassed zebra. So they love jokes like that, and you can use those in your classroom to help second language learners realize the similarity between words that are actually quite different. What has 4 wheels and flies? A garbage truck, or it could be an airplane. But because children ages 6 to 9 enjoy that kind of humor so much, use it in your classroom to help your second language learners. Again, your text focuses on the fact that after puberty, second language learning is going to um, interfere. Well, I guess I should reverse that and say that first language learning, what they already know, is going to interfere with learning the second language. And so in the second language classroom with these older learners, you're going to have to use a lot of demonstration and a lot of pronunciation drill. And it's up to you as the educator to think of a fun way to do that and to keep it interesting. Your book mentioned in particular Japanese students having to learn the differences between the L sound and the R sound, and I thought that was really interesting. Um, there are some factors that affect second language acquisition. The most important things would be contextual support, which includes nonverbal clues, um, making things where they can easily comprehend them, things that are in the environment that are going to help them. And also another very important factor is cognitive demand, the amount of brain strain, the level of difficulty that is in the content that you're trying to teach. I'm going to end chapter 8 here, and then I will send an additional a quick little discussion of Cummins quadrant. Thanks for listening.